Rupert Bell, it's such a privilege to have you on. You're kept very busy in the world of broadcasting, covering sports from golf to football. I'm not going to pretend to know much about football, but racing is, of course, a huge part of your family history and a huge passion of yours. What I'm intrigued about is people meet you at dinners, drinks, and they say, oh, what's it like to be talking on the radio? What do people not get from the outside around the pleasure that it gives you?
I think I can even give you an example today. I was talking to somebody and this person said, oh, are you into sport? And I said, yes, and I did this. I think people don't it's a hobby. This isn't a job. If you're into sport, this is perceived as maybe a bit of a dream job, because most people end up talking about football. They talk about football, they find a common ground, whatever you're interested in. And football is obviously, we know, quite a sort of opening gambit in conversations, and sport. So to be able to do your hobby in terms of it's an excuse to watch sport. And I was never a very good sportsman. In fact, I was downright useless in most sporting endeavours. But I just was always interested in sport. And as you say in the introduction, we come from a racing, sort of horsey background. And obviously my brother trains racehorses in Newmarket. My son Ollie, he presents on ITV Racing. My parents were heavily into horses, full stop, and owned racehorses. Other members of my family did. But I never sat on a horse. I was too windy. They're dangerous beasts. But I was always interested in racing and sport. Because I can even remember at school, and I would be filling in racing results into a book, age 10. So I was even at that age interested in sport, and from the, not to say reporting point of view, but the information and wanting to get the newspaper, fill in into a book the racing results. There used to be an annual that came out when things that I used to obsess about was record attendances at grounds and learning all 92 Football League grounds names. I was always interested. I was pretty useless at school. I'll make no bones about it. It scraped some A-levels. But the one thing I've been able to remember all my life, to the annoyance of everyone, I'm a pretty good member when it comes to sports questions on a quiz team. Because I can remember sports facts going back a long way and remember names. The answer to the original question, I feel incredibly lucky that even into my 60s, I'm able to cover and enjoy sport and work at it. Only thing I pay to go and see, I'm an Aston Villa season ticket holder, and that keeps me in contact with my youngest son. But we both are passionate about that. I pay for that. Otherwise, I've been extremely lucky that I don't have to pay to go and watch sport.
Because you've been doing your hobby for a while, and thanks so much for explaining in such a giving so much varied context into really why you like it and what it means in that space. But there aren't that many people, often if you're at a dinner party, many people unfortunately don't enjoy what they do. But it's very infectious when you find people who really have a passion. And if they're as lucky enough as you say, that it's what they do for work, then it's very infectious. When you meet other people who are in that lucky bunch that also really enjoy it, are you constantly energized? Is this your 24/7? Are you really geared in? Do you ever get out of this?
I don't gear out of it because I'm doing my hobby. I don't obsess, but I will look at the sports pages every day. It's what I enjoy. It's my hobby. I heard an interview with a famous actor who said, you've got to enjoy what you do. Now, it's not possible for everybody, because if you are just stuck in a 9 to 5, going to the office every day, I know I did that for a bit in the later 80s, still in sport, but it was more office-based. Drove me mad. I just didn't have the temperament for it. And I would have been miserable. But I do know, you've got to say, I am extremely lucky to be able to do what I am doing. I'm not suddenly saying I've earned squillions. I haven't, because I've done my hobby. But I've been lucky enough to be able to do it and continue to do it. And I've been involved in sports broadcasting for nearly 40 years now. and hopefully my broadcasting career will continue to as long as I can continue to string a sentence together. And I think the important thing is sound as if you're enjoying it. And one of the things that I know that I do have an enthusiasm for things and for broadcasting, and I think that has stood me in good stead. I go to Wimbledon every year, and I always say that every time I walk through Wimbledon for the first time every year, I feel like a kid in a sweet shop. I feel as if I'm going through those gates for the first time.
You know those little moments that lift your day? A smile, the sun coming out, or a piece of chocolate? Audrey's Chocolates have been handcrafting chocolate for over 70 years. Chocolate to die for. It comes in beautiful boxes that make for the perfect gift. Or bars of chocolate that feed daily joy. Discover your moment of joy by visiting audreyschocolates.co.uk and treat yourself to 10% off using the code TheCollective10.
I go to the Cheltenham Festival every year, the big racing festival in March. Again, I drive down Cleve Hill heading towards the Cheltenham racecourse, and the old adrenaline starts pumping and you think, God, I'm lucky. And there's no to it. It sounds smug, but I know I'm still as enthusiastic as ever about going to sports events. I went to the Ryder Cup a few weeks ago. Boy, was that fun.
You're clearly so aware of the privilege, but also so energised and so in sync with all this that's happening. And a product that might come from that is wanting to give back and help others, which, having known you over the years, you very much to think about other people and consider things from their different positions. Now, the sport world, there's so many parts to that. You're involved very much in the media side of things. You must be constantly meeting people who are in different parts to your world and close to what you do, and joining the dots, putting them in touch with people. Has there been a time where you spotted new talent and you've been like, my God, I've got to put them in touch with this person?
I go and speak to people in the Racing Media Academy on an annual basis. This is the way I can give back. I want people to feel that if they're going into the job that but if I look at where I was 40 years ago, where the job was, to where it is now, we didn't have the internet. So my working life would have been very different. Now I can research something and just go on the internet. So what I always tell people is, you think you're at a certain place now. I could not imagine where 40 years down the line that we'd be having the media landscape that we have now. So I always say to people, you've got to be flexible and be prepared to adapt. Never at any stage thinks that is going to be the way forward for the next 15 years. Yet, because, as I say, in the late 80s, the internet and the sort of early 90s at that stage was just boffins working out something. And then the whole media landscape has changed so much. So anyone wanting to get into the business, it's much harder now, I have to say. But the way people are having to get into it now is through showing their talents on social media and various things, and using that as almost their CV, and showing what they're doing and how they are trying to communicate and adapting. I know that I'm in a very lucky position, that I've been around long enough that I'm in a position where, not saying the work take care of itself, because it's not as simple as that, but I know I'm lucky. When you're starting out and you don't have contacts here, there and everywhere, it's not easy. So people have to graft pretty hard. Used to be, back in the day, people used to go and work for a local radio station for next to nothing on a Saturday afternoon and help on the sports programme. But that's hard now. So lots of people are having to multitask, be able to film, edit, you name it. I'm not so good on the editing bit, and these eyes are not so good, so probably quite difficult to pointing a camera in the right direction. But anyway, you've got to be able to adapt. Never look at going one route, because you're never quite sure where an opening might come that takes you maybe into a more enjoyable aspect of the business. But when you are starting out, always think slightly outside the box as to where your career would go. And I'll give you an example. We've talked about horse racing. But even in the 90s, I was beginning to feel the sporting racing's position within the British media was changing a bit, right? And I thought racing's not quite got its hold on the British public as it used to. So I then thought I need to branch out. So I made a point of trying to make sure I got into tennis, golf and other sports to give myself fullback positions. And I'm very glad I did. And that's why no didn't enter my vocabulary. Just try it. And then if you're cocked up, then that's fine and move on.
Yeah, and the landscape's changing so much. For some people's job, their end goal is very obvious. Like for an investor, it's making more money. For you, what do you see as your key objective when you're presenting for Radio Wimbledon?
Make sure they pay me at the end of the job. No, I'm a very simplistic view. Whereas if you're an investment banker, you are probably trying to make not any money for yourself, but for your clients. I'm here to make sure I go there and I enjoy what I do and make sure that I'm still giving 100%. My goal is to make sure that I enjoy what I do, and at the end of the day, I've done the best I can. Remember, it's a subjective business. Your producer at the end of the line might not like what you say, or just says your face or voice doesn't fit anymore. So you have to learn how to accept that on the chin. And the media landscape is one that's fraught with difficulties now because of what was perceived as one direction, but that's all changed now. So it's a much more, can be seen at times, maybe some people might say unfair, but actually the landscape has changed for people again getting into the media. I don't really have a sort of, I want to do that. Just know your limitations and wherever you are, do the best I can. I wouldn't say that I'm a presenter, i.e. someone who presents programmes. I'm much better, and from my perspective, feeding off being interviewed and contributing that way rather than being the numero uno. And I discovered that. I did a bit of presenting for TalkSport and I loved it, but and you've got to accept. And happily, I got plenty of other work doing commentating or the summarising or being a guest in a programme. I was much happier doing that than actually being a presenter. So again, my goals have been, right, find out what you're good at and then continue to enjoy it throughout.
If you're briefed to cover, let's say, Djokovic is playing in the final, cover the game, what does that involve?
Now, every commentator is different and will do it. Notes of David Croft, who does Formula One. That is such a technical sport. You look at what he's got and you look at some people doing the NFL stuff. They've got pages on a roster of a team that is long. For me, you get lots of information. But again, I don't like too much in front of me. So yes, I will read up and then just have the odd little bullet point about Djokovic, key stats, because you think about if he's going to win, how you're going to describe that moment. And so you just read up, make notes, and then for me, make the notes, and writing them down is almost my way of putting it into the old memory bank. But I won't necessarily have it all in front of me. If I'm doing a commentary on the Grand National, there are 34 runners in that race. I have the colours in front of me, but I'll have a few little numbers next to the rider or the trainer, maybe how many times he's won the race, or some nugget about the jockey I might just have. And that will be about the end of it. And I know a lot of people in football, they will write down a sort of pithy line that will then be relevant. So when they get the 30-second soundbite, so they come up with, and if I do that, I know I'll stumble across it. But what I would have thought about is maybe what would happen should something happen, that you then can summarise that up and encapsulate the moment, so that if that 30-second soundbite is played back, it actually tells the story of what happened. And
jumping into that world of tennis, there are so many parts to the sport. You've got the statistics around the technicalities of the
Yeah.
shots to what's happening off the court. Is there a part of the game that you feel is really under talked about? And perhaps you can think of some stories that you feel have just always stood in your mind as really intriguing.
Well, you actually look at when I first started going to Wimbledon was in '94, and I went behind the ears tennis reporter and didn't really understand the game. But we had Steffi Graf, it was the Andre Agassi, Pete Sampras era, so there were some great players lurking around. But it does take you time just to get and understand the mental side of the game. And to me, that is the most fascinating aspect of actually top-class sport, is what separates the good to the very good, the exceptional. And more often than not, it is what's between the ears. Because I can go onto a driving range at a golf tournament and I'm seeing 156 players absolutely gripping it and ripping it down the practice range. But what happens is, in the tournament, more often than not, the cream does just rise to the top. And why? Because they just are mentally just a little bit better. And that's why I find tennis, it's such a fascinating game at times, because you can be watching a set unfold and then suddenly you are at 4-3 and you are serving at 3-4 down and 30-40 down. That is the moment you suddenly find you're 5-3 and then the guy's got, or the lady's got the chance to then serve for that set. The mental game, you can see it happen to the less good at that 30-40, and they miss their first serve, and then they go, oh, heck here. And then either they put in a weak second serve, which then the opponent comes all over. Because Federer came up with a statistic. He said he didn't actually win many more points than his rivals over his career. But what he did do was win the points that mattered. Because I think he said that he only won, if he looked at all his matches, only 53% of the points in all his matches. Right? Yet, you look at his record, it's when, of those 53%, it's the points that he won that actually made the difference. And that makes the difference in top-class sport between the good and the very good. It's when it comes to those key moments. And that is what's fascinating about top-class sport, whether it be tennis, golf, or any other big moments. Athletics, who's the one who can cope when running in an 800-metre Olympic final?
And Rupert, when you meet these athletes, do you notice anything that isn't necessarily obvious from the outside?
I look at one of the best, Tommy Fleetwood, as a golfer at the moment, he won a big end-of-season tournament. But you look at him, he's a lad from Southport. You don't actually look at him and think, why is he... But what he's got is something's instilled in him, a work ethic that is second to none. He's also an extremely likeable man as well, but he's also must have, and he's had to learn it, an ability to, at the key moment, to block out all the noise. But you wouldn't necessarily look at him. You see him walking along the streets and you probably think, just looks like an average Joe. Yeah, and that's the thing, it's when they cross the white line in their sporting environment, what triggers this innate ability that sets them apart from the rest. And that's what I love about watching top-class sport. You've got to be incredibly single-minded and selfish, but actually that's probably true of life. The people who get to the very, very top in any profession have to be incredibly single-minded and say, if I want to, you've got to make sacrifices. And it's not always easy. But in sport, you probably, to get to the very top, you're probably sacrificing your teenage years. And you're... Yeah. Does that make sense? Because you've got to keep working, keep grinding to get yourself into that position that will enable you to then go and play on whatever sport it is, on the biggest stage of all of your chosen sport, and you have to grind. You can have talent, but actually it's how you maximise that talent. And that's what's so fascinating in my mind about sport, is how you can just look at the best and how they do seem to be able to, whether it be a cricketer, top batsman, why has he got so much more time than the next person when there's a 90-mile-an-hour ball coming at him, yet he seems to make it look, when he's got a blink of an eye, so much easier than when anybody else. Those are the things that I just love about what makes a top-class sports person better than the rest, and why I love watching sport, to see those moments happen.
Yeah, there must be some kind of theory around how, because if you see someone driving a nice car, for instance, you think, oh, life must be easy. But what you don't see, and it's so often the case, is the brutal hard work and focus, and that word sacrifice, that these people go to, the hours and hours of long evenings just doing the same thing. And that's really around process. Processes, some of the smartest people I know talk about, like, at the end of the day, you've just got to put so much time in, but also just be obsessive about the process. Now, jumping away from process, even though it would be interesting to understand for you and your process and how to do your best job in covering, let's say, Wimbledon. When you're covering a game, it must be very intimate. Let's say you're covering someone like Roger Federer. You must notice really small things about them. It's just subtle changes. Right. Do you have any comments on that? And then secondly, are there some moments that you've seen that, as you said, history and life can change within half a second? Are there some moments that you look back on and you're like, oh my God, they've just done something very left field and it's got them where they needed to go?
You can, if you look at sometimes when you're watching Rory McIlroy and you think he's put the ball in the Bondukes, and he did it this year's at the Masters as he went on to win the career Grand Slam. He played a shot that had so much risk, and he bent this ball round and it landed on the green, and he ended up, I don't know, with a birdie, but it was the most extraordinary, courageous thing to do, because normally they're just hitting the ball straight, but he needed to curve this wretched thing a couple of 100 yards down the fairway, and you actually go, flipping heck. That is, you've got to have the cojones to do that. But you've also got to have the confidence in your own ability. Now, you look at when Djokovic they'd be playing some of those matches that'd be lasting 6 hours, and you'd be going, how the heck are they still doing this? Because that's a marathon, 5 hours, 58 minutes to play a tennis match. It's extraordinary. And those are the moments you think, they're being driven by they're almost being driven by some sort of supernatural power. And that, I think, is what, again, I love about watching sport, or if you're watching someone riding a horse, it's difficult, and somehow they manage to get into the right place to drive through that gap. This is where you look at why but they've done it through hard work. Everything's about, you make your own luck. It is a sort of cliche, but you do at the top level, because you've practiced. You've worked hard in these situations. You haven't just expected that by some divine you were going to go and win the Masters. After it took Rory McIlroy, I had to go through mental hoops and sort of everything to try and complete that career Grand Slam. But he had to wait from 2014 to 2025 for him to win his next major to do this. And that is, in golfing terms, that's a lifetime. So that's where you look at these people and admire and realise at times you're watching on, you're a very privileged bystander. I was lucky enough to watch Tiger Woods in his pomp. And you go, whoa, he was playing golf on a different level, transforming the game. And he did by his mental dominance of his rivals, his brilliance of shot making, and just that all-round package. And then you just have to live in the moment. I've seen some great moments. Tiger Woods in his pomp, watching Andy Murray. I think the one game I will never ever forget, he played in the O2 and was on his way to getting to world #1 in 2017. And he played a semi-final and he looked down and out. And somehow, by just sheer willpower, Andy Murray won that semi-final, and it looked as if he hadn't got a hope in Hades of winning it. But he dragged himself up by the mental bootstraps and forced himself to win that match. And then he got to world #1, and the physical will and tenacity, making the most of your talents, that was Andy Murray. I will never forget that match in the O2 for as long as I live. It was a long, grueling three-setter, but it was won by sheer bloody mindedness of Andy Murray to win that, as he was so determined to get to world #1, and world #1 he did. And when you think he was playing in the era of Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, there's some really good players, yet sadly he only won 3 majors, but he got to world #1, and he got to world #1 by just being bloody minded and determined. And I don't think I have ever seen somebody prove that it sheer mental grit and determination. And he put his body through the ringer. Look, he ended up with a titanium hip, and he did his very best to keep playing, but that took its toll physically on him. But nothing was going to stop him doing that. And I will never forget that match at the O2 as long as I live, even though I was lucky enough to see him win Wimbledon, and I've seen other, but as one of the great sporting sort of moments for me, and I was commentating on that match, and I will never forget that. Absolutely amazing.
Clearly, you get such an insight into what people are like, and different professions can get very unique insights in that sense. Now, going on these tournaments year on year, there must be a kind of very unusual sense where you're seeing the same people in the media teams, etc., etc. Are there some things that you really appreciate going into those times? And secondly, has there been an interaction with a real top sporting icon that you just sometimes just reflect on and just keep on thinking about it occasionally?
I've never got to know, I've obviously met sportsmen and women over the years. I've never got particularly close in that sense to any of them. But I do absolutely enjoy the camaraderie of going back, maybe covering the Open and being part of the same team and feeling part of that team element of being part of maybe Open Golf or working Radio Wimbledon or working for TalkSport at Cheltenham or being part of that team is one of the great pleasures as far as I'm concerned, that it's not just about you, the commentator or the presenter. There's a whole team around you who are there to support you, and it is your job. And to be the on-site, I'm probably old school, but I'm definitely in that adage of work hard and play hard school. And actually, it's maybe something that's lost now. I got most of my work from going to the pub and then talking to the sports editor, and then after a couple of pints, they'd say, we need someone to go and do that. Oh, I can't do it. So off I'd go and do it. Not there and then, I hasten to add, but the next day. But there's a lot of that talking to people and being around people is something that working from home and everything, you miss out on so much. So going to events is, I will always, look, nowadays the media, I do stuff from home, as what are we doing now? But I do cover events from home and it's great fun. But I would absolutely recommend that there's nothing better than actually being at the event, because you can smell it, feel it. And then because you can smell it and feel it, you can then bring your own dynamic to whatever you're trying to say about it. So I'm definitely in the position that be part of it, be part of a team is what makes my job fun. Behind every broadcaster, there's people plugging in your kit and there's people producing in the studio. There's a lot of people who are doing work on your behalf to make you sound good.
Yeah, so many interactions as well with those people probably make up such a high percentage of the pleasure that the job gives you. A clear message there is get out the house, try things.
No, I think absolutely. It's not always easy, but I'm not complaining at times because COVID changed the media landscape in terms of being able to work from home and doing things like we are now, rather than having to flog into London or wherever to sit in a studio. Everything that has changed, and that has to be a good thing. But actually, when it comes to covering an event, it's so much better being there. But the problem is now that it's very expensive, and the media landscape is changing in that respect, even to the extent that the Ashes tour that has been covered on the TNT, the cricket series, you've got a team of commentators. I think they're going to be based in a studio somewhere in Europe, with half the other team down in Australia. And you go, back in the day, they'd have just sent them all to Australia. But it's the economics now has changed. So a lot of stuff is done from a studio because it is an expensive thing to do now. And people, commercial considerations aside. So it is a different, again, landscape. But give me every chance to be at an event, I'm there like a shot.
And speaking of the landscape changing, our access to data and information and knowing a story before it's really become a story, i.e. through Twitter, etc., having all these platforms that give us insight into what you call talent, these sports professionals and what's happening in their lives. Some information true, some not true. There's such a huge array of information, but also the way in which we watch things has changed, and the cameras. And and I'm thinking about Drive to Survive here as well, getting people into a sport because people like so many different parts to a sport in general. How do you want the interaction between people and sport to change in the next 10 years?
It's such a different landscape now, as you say. Drive to Survive sort of transformed Formula One's fortunes, full stop. And now everybody is talking about doing the equivalent thing to try and bring out the personalities. But you've got to be careful. Not everyone's going to be a success of these things. You just think we'll do it and it's going to lead us to being the next big thing. It just doesn't work like that. And people are getting their sport in so many different ways. Now, before there was very little live sport. But now you can probably, if you can subscribe to that many channels, you can probably watch every football match you want, every rugby match, every cricket match. But obviously it's an expensive business. Now people get their sporting information very differently. Now, who'd have thought, for me, who'd have thought that I'm in radio, yet now I spend most of my time, if I go on to talk sport, I have to be in vision because everything's on YouTube now. So you can see the way the landscape has just changed. Again, it comes back to, I can never assume, but what I want people to do is to consume their sport, find a sport they're passionate about, and then enjoy it. But the coverage of sport has changed. As I say, there was very little live sport. It used to be back in the day, say in the 70s, 80s, you'd have the odd live football match, maybe the FA Cup final and a couple of others. Then there would be Horse of the Year show on at 9:30 in the evening, at 9:30, because there were just 3 channels. And that was your viewing opportunities before the 10 o'clock news. After the 9 o'clock news on BBC, you get 45 minutes of show jumping. But now, of course, there's so much live sport and information is being consumed in so many different ways. And it's also, you've got to work out what is real and what is not real. And that is one of the other things, is because talking about changing my career, you talk about sport, I have developed a career as a royal commentator for reasons that I'm still trying to work out. But it has happened. But this is an area where you have to dance because there's so much out there on social media. And if you believed everything out there, and you said that, A, you'd be sued with an inch of your life, and B, you just have to go, politics and everything, you've just got to know and just always breathe and take stock. And that applies to everything, not just in terms of reporting royals, in whether it be politics, and we've seen what's happened even as we record this week, where news is not being dealt with as it should be because there's a narrative. You've actually just got to make sure you understand the story and stick to it and make sure that whatever you're saying is backed up with facts. And don't just blindly throw out a theory about a player or whatever you're doing unless you're actually pretty sure, that 100% sure what you're saying is as truthful as you think it can be given your sources.
I think the world really favours, I'm sure there's 100 arguments against this, but people, consumers, if you want to be entertained, there's something for you. Tell us about the Royal Correspondent stuff.
Well, the Royal, I'll tell you how it came about. And it was very surreal.
Can we jump back? Because is it your brother who has trained some of the Queens?
He trained my brother trained for the Queen, and I had one or two other royal connections. But one of the reasons, when the royal wedding of William and Kate happened, Talk Sport, they didn't have Talk TV and all these sort of things happening. They thought, we'd better cover it. I'll tell you what, well, Rupert's brother trains for the Queen, and he's called Rupert, so he must be posh, so he must know what he's talking about. Bizarrely, I ended up watching German TV, covering the FEI World Cup indoor show jumping finals in a German press room while reporting on the goings-on outside Westminster Abbey for the wedding of William and the Prince and Princess of Wales, as they now are. But I think I made my career because I did notice two things. A lot of people noticed the Princess of Wales' sister as she walked into the church. And then I also noticed that the now Sir David Beckham had his medals on the wrong side. And that's an ex-military man. Oh, God, David, you've made a bit of a faux pas there. But bearing in mind my audience, Talk Sport, I think it says what it is. I wasn't there to give it the full royal pageantry. I was there to report on what the Talk Sport listener who wasn't going to be obsessed with the royals, but he just might want to know what is going on, what's going to be the main talking points.
It's been a huge success, the YouTube, I don't know whether you're part of.
But this is where you think, how did that come about? And then obviously it then grew. People thought, well, he seems to report on it in a factual but entertaining way. And I think that is the importance, and not to get obsessed by it, because I want to make sure what I'm saying is right, but I also know I'm here to entertain, but I'm not here to say things that are inherently wrong. But the idea, and this is my point, you never know what's around the corner, that 40 years ago I would be part of a weekly YouTube royal podcast with a presenter in California and me over here, and regularly attracting over 100,000 views a week. And I'm thinking, this is flipping bonkers.
And it's so popular, particularly with the American audience.
Or the American audience. And it's very weird. It's very weird. If you look at some of the comments, I think, God, people must have more time on their hands. But anyway, there we go. All very nice and complimentary.
And have there been any interactions that you've had with the members of the royal family?
I did. And it's only recently that I've become the chairman of the British Equestrian Media Association. And it was a great honour. And they don't do this very often, but the Princess Royal accepted a Lifetime Achievement Award on behalf of our organisation. And that, to me, was probably one of the proudest moments of my career, to be able to do that and to honour somebody who's normally very self-effacing and is no nonsense, and it's, I'm here to serve, and it's not about me. She's definitely in that category, old-fashioned view. I'm here to serve. I'm not the story. But she did agree to receive this award for her extraordinary contribution, not only as a rider, because she rode at the Olympics and a very successful 3-day event in her own right.
This is Princess Anne.
This is Princess Anne. Hugely successful in the early 70s. And obviously her daughter actually became a world champion in her own right at 3-day eventing. But more importantly, the work she does behind the scenes in equestrianism, whether it be at the IOC and political level, and just representing and what she's done on behalf of sport. And then she graciously accepted it. And I'm not sure what she's done with the magnificent glass plate we gave her, but she probably has a few of them. But I hope it hasn't been secreted into a far corner of our house to Gackham for me. And I think she too was touched. But that to me was probably the proudest thing that I've been able to help engineer on behalf of the very small organisation that I'm chairman of, but to actually enable, and we gave it to her last year at the London Horse Show. And I think of all the things I've been able to do, because to pull that off, to give that to her, knowing that it's not something that she does it takes it very reluctant because of her inborn humility in those kind of circumstances, I think was one of the best things I've been able to do in my life. That's probably the best personal interaction. I go to Aston Villa and I do see William up at the top at the stands, because I'm in the same section as him, but he's up at the top when he goes to Villa Park and I'm down there in the season ticket holder. So that's about as near as interaction I get with other members of the royal family. We occasionally turn up at the same football match.
And when you're looking at what they do, there's a lot of unknown. It's a very private world, but there's a lot that people, I think, their whole sense of duty and what they do in the background. Do you have any view that you feel that things that they do that are so great for society that aren't necessarily talked about? I
always say, if anyone is anti the monarchy, show me a better system to replace it with. And not everyone's good, and everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I've got to say, then give me someone who can represent this country that can achieve as much as it can on the global scale as us having a royal family. Of course, things change, but we have had this, in essence, since 1066. It has evolved, it's moved with the times, and it's obviously a very hard thing to do. And we know the royal family at the moment are having to deal with some interesting, they're not sideshows, but they're in the full glare of publicity, which can't be easy for them. But they've sort of had, somehow, through history, the royal family has had always will have had its detractors. They've just got to somehow block out the noise and keep the focus. Because the important thing is when the royal family go overseas, it's the soft power, the importance of the Commonwealth to the ground, what it means for Britain. It gives us some relevance on the international stage in an ever-changing landscape. So for the royal family, with all the sort of hoo-ha that is going on at the moment, they've just got to keep their eye on the ball. We know it's a sort of slightly difficult times at the moment, and the royal family is there to suffer the slings and arrows, but it's a mighty difficult job for the king. There's a lot of pressure on Prince William. You have to report it in an objective way, but make no apologist. I am a monarchist. But as I say, I will report it in as factual a way as possible. I won't skirt away from, if things do seem to be if things aren't quite right, then you report on it, but make sure you've got your facts right. And then leave it for everyone else to make their own judgment.
What following you have, and what a following you have on YouTube.
I know but it's not just that. But if you're going to do it, just if I'm reporting sport, make sure you know what you're talking about, and don't bluff your way through it. And I think that's a lesson in life. You've got to top sportsmen and women don't bluff their way to get to the top. They have to work hard. It doesn't matter what you do. You still have to work hard and make sure that what you're doing is entertaining, but at the heart of it, you are talking sense about what you are watching, doing, or reporting on. And I think that is an important lesson in life.
And we were covering how just broad sport is. If you were to have a YouTube channel or compete against fellow Conrads who know a lot about sport, is there a topic that you would dive really deep in to maybe compete, or B, even just as cover? Maybe, for example, you have a fascination on the relationships between different sports players, or maybe it's the statistics around performance.
Here's the thing, podcasts proliferate now. But here's my take. I won't enter that market on my own, because I think it's, unless, again, if you're going to do it, you've got to believe in what you're selling and talking about. Because if you're going to work hard at it, you've got to make sure you believe in what you're trying to achieve and what's the end game. And so for me, I've done lots of podcasts, but I do know they can be expensive to produce. And so I don't really have a desire to go and suddenly, that's why I always, everything's a bit of an accident. It happens. No one can, basically, I stood in for somebody on this Airs and Spares podcast, and then they thought, oh, that went quite well. And then you suddenly find that you're in the sort of position one. And so it becomes, you just don't know what's going to, but I've never really thought, I have ideas. One sport, a podcast that I did with Michel Roux, when we went to his restaurant in Mayfair, me, Lizzie Kelly and another guy, and we sat down, getting a free lunch courtesy in Gare Roche before it closed down, I hasten to add, which was a pretty good week on my behalf. And we had a fantastic, but we sat down with him and talked about his sporting life and the parallels between him being a top chef and the sort of his love of sport and his whole life. And that was an absolute privilege and an honour to host something like that and talk to someone who's not a top sportsman, one of the world's greatest chefs, Michel Roux, thank you very much, and had the most delicious lunch, accompanied by the most delicious wine. You could see the sort of thing I'd like to be doing, Arthur. I'm bringing my love of food, coupled with people talking about sport. But I'm not at this stage hankering, because if I could do that, would probably be one I'd talking to people in those kind of environments, are getting absolutely K-eyed while talking, so getting increasingly talkative. But that was a great privilege and fun thing to do.
I mean, Rupert, December's coming up. There's a lot of charity events. I'm thinking of all the corporate dinners that you could be lighting up and doing.
Well, I don't do that. No one invites me to do those. I've done a bit of auctioneering, but I don't see myself. I can't tell a gag, but I can tell a story. That would be my view of what.
Which we're now going to be moving on to the quickfire questions, but what's so clear from you, Rupert, is just how you are so unself-involved. You really don't play on the accomplishments and what you achieve and what you do. Clearly that helps you just not overthink and just plough on.
No, I won't analyse this hour and sweat and say, why did I say that? What I say, as long as I haven't libelled anybody, and I don't think I have here, Arthur. I might try and libel your father, but I might be able to get away with that. But anyway, that's another story. I don't know. Anyway, I've got some great stories, but I don't think they're here. But anyway, you can edit this out. But anyway, my view is I enjoy what I do. I won't take it too seriously because I know I'm in a lucky job, and I mustn't think that I'm any better than anybody else. I'm just doing a job, which I am very lucky to do.
So here we are, moving on to the quickfire questions. If you weren't broadcasting, what would you be doing?
Dead. That's not probably the answer. What would I be doing? I have no idea what I could do, because I didn't want to work in an office. I wanted to be an actor, went to the National Youth Theatre, realised I couldn't sing, couldn't dance and couldn't act. So you've got a lot of things against you. But I had aspirations of being an actor. But
very charming, Rupert. Yeah. You could swing into many a role. The most underrated role in media?
Just sticking with what I know, I think you've got to applaud all the people who are behind the scenes, making sure that whatever programme you may or may not be working on, because they're slaving away without the recognition that I may get or anybody else may get. Anyone who works behind the scenes, and always be nice to them, whatever their level, because in 10 years' time, they could be running the station. So don't upset anybody at whatever level. So my rule is, anybody, as I said already earlier, that it's about the team. And at some stage, to someone starting out who will have aspirations of getting to a management position and don't think you're any better than that person, even though you may be front of house.
3 things you get joy from.
Always proud of all my children's achievements. Seeing Aston Villa do well. And what
Do you have to
was
wait for that,
three-
or do you have to wait?
No, not at the moment. No, we're doing all right. It's quite fun. There's been some bad times, but that's all right. Waking up every morning, just being around and ready to enjoy life.
One unusual thing that gives you pleasure.
Making sure my cucumbers grow properly.
Love that. Love that. long may they grow. Favourite film, book, or artist that isn't obvious?
Love a bit of Supertramp. I'm a sucker for black and white movies. Things like any Humphrey Bogart, Audrey Hepburn, all those kind, Catherine Hepburn, anything starring Cary Grant in those rom-com eras, arsenic, I love all that stuff. And book, if it's not sport, I probably don't read enough of those, but but I think I've given you any sports book.
You can cover one event you haven't covered. What would it be? And then the final one is one athlete that you could meet tomorrow. Who would it be?
Covered most things. It's actually quite difficult because I've been flipping lucky, particularly of sports I like.
Maybe an
Racing,
unusual sport.
No, that's the trouble. I've covered so many. I've covered table tennis. I've done every. But a big sporting occasion that I haven't been to, that I would like to cover. I'd love to cover. I'd love to have covered a World Cup final football. I've done the Rugby World Cup final, so I've been very lucky. And it's quite difficult. You got me on the hop there because I've covered all the four majors.
Wow.
I've covered Ryder Cups. I have never done the Olympics properly in situ, so ultimately I'd love to have covered an Olympics for the full 2 weeks, being able to watch all the different range of sports.
Great answer. And a sports professional that you can meet.
If I can meet properly.
Yeah, for dinner tomorrow night. Dead or alive, just to make it
No,
easy
well, we got quite a lot of options here. Who would I like to meet in my world? If I think of my world, that actually would be really interesting. Bobby Jones, who was a great amateur golfer from the 20s. I'd have loved to have met him. Someone like Harry Varden, great golfers of yesteryear. From a racing point of view, so I know most of them. If I go back through, there's no one really. Well, maybe Gordon Richards. Some people from racing. What about tennis? Rod Laver. Never met him. Rod Laver. That would be a good one.
Fantastic. Rupert, what a privilege it is to have you on.
Now you've got happy editing.